On March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777, one of the world's most reliable and advanced aircraft, was getting ready for a completely routine overnight flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Aboard were 227 passengers from all over the world, along with 12 Malaysian crew members. The flight, MH370, lifted off just after midnight into a clear, calm sky. For the next 38 minutes, everything was perfectly normal. The pilot's communications with air traffic control were standard. The plane was exactly on its flight path, and there were no signs of bad weather or any technical problems. Then came the final, now haunting, transmission from the cockpit as the plane was about to enter Vietnamese airspace. The voice was calm, routine. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Just minutes later, the aircraft's icon on the radar screens blinked and then vanished. And then there was just nothing. A massive Boeing 777 had simply disappeared without a trace. A decade later, the world is still asking the same question. What happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370? In the immediate aftermath, there was total confusion. When MH370 didn't check in with Vietnamese air traffic controllers, a search was launched in the South China Sea, the obvious place to look, since that's where the plane was last tracked. But as days bled into a week, the massive multinational effort found nothing. No debris, no oil slicks, no emergency signals. It was as if the 200-ton aircraft had been erased from the sky. The mystery got even deeper when Malaysian military officials made a startling announcement. Their primary radar, a system that tracks objects with radio waves instead of transponder signals, had actually followed an unidentified aircraft for over an hour after MH370 vanished from civilian radar. This aircraft made a sharp, deliberate turn back across the Malay Peninsula, flying west toward the Andaman Sea. It followed a weaving path, almost like it was trying to skirt the edges of Malaysian and Thai airspace, a move some experts think was designed to avoid being detected. The radar track finally ended 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang Island, out over the open ocean. The plane hadn't just disappeared, it had been intentionally flown off course in the opposite direction of its destination for at least another hour. The most crucial breakthrough, though, came from a British satellite company, Inmarsat. One of their satellites, fixed in orbit over the Indian Ocean, had been getting automated pings from the plane. Even though the main communication systems had gone dark, a satellite data unit on the aircraft kept responding to hourly status requests. These pings didn't give a specific location, but they confirmed two vital facts. The plane was still powered up, and it had kept flying for nearly 7 hours after it disappeared from military radar. By measuring the time it took for these signals to travel, investigators were able to calculate two possible flight paths, or arcs. One stretched north over the heavily monitored lands of Central Asia, the other stretched south into one of the most remote and desolate parts of the planet, the southern Indian Ocean. Since no one on the northern route had spotted the plane on radar, investigators arrived at a grim conclusion. On March 24th, the Malaysian Prime Minister announced that, based on this new analysis, MH370's flight had ended in the southern Indian Ocean, far from any possible landing site. With this new information, the search effort shifted dramatically. The initial searches in the South China Sea were called off, and one of the largest and most expensive search operations in aviation history began in the vast, unforgiving waters southwest of Australia. The scale of the task was almost impossible to comprehend. The initial search area covered 4.6 million square kilometres. That's bigger than the entire Indian subcontinent. Over time, the area was narrowed down, but crews were still looking for a needle in a haystack in some of the deepest and most dangerous waters on Earth. For years, ships with sophisticated deep-sea sonar scoured a 120,000 square kilometre priority area on the ocean floor, a landscape of immense underwater canyons and ridges. Aircraft from dozens of countries flew thousands of missions, with crews scanning the waves for any sign of wreckage. But despite this incredible effort, nothing was found. The main underwater search, coordinated by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, was officially called off in January 2017, having found no trace of the plane. The first real piece of evidence didn't show up until July 2015, more than a year after the plane disappeared. A piece of an aircraft's wing, called a flaperon, washed up on Réunion Island, thousands of kilometres west of the search zone. French authorities confirmed it came from a Boeing 777, and based on part numbers and maintenance records, it was specifically linked to MH370. In the years that followed, more than 24 other pieces of debris were found along the coasts of Mozambique, Tanzania and Madagascar, carried across the ocean by powerful currents. While only a few of these have been definitively confirmed as from MH370, many others are considered highly likely to be from the missing plane. These discoveries proved that the plane did go down in the Indian Ocean, but they did little to help find the main wreckage and its vital black boxes. Without the plane's flight data recorder or cockpit voice recorder, what really happened in the final hours of MH370 is a matter of intense debate. The official investigation couldn't land on a definitive cause, but it left the world with a few deeply unsettling theories. The most prominent, and maybe the most disturbing, is that it was a deliberate act by one of the pilots, specifically Captain Zaharia Ahmad Shah. This pilot suicide theory suggests that the captain locked his co-pilot out of the cockpit, shut down communications and depressurized the plane, causing everyone on board to pass out from lack of oxygen. He could have then let the plane fly on autopilot for hours until it ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. Fueling this idea was a shocking revelation. Data recovered from the captain's home flight simulator showed he had practiced a very similar flight path into the remote southern Indian Ocean less than a month before the flight. Experts who back this theory say the deliberate, precise way the plane veered off course points to a conscious pilot at the controls, but investigators never found any hard evidence of a motive. Background checks on both the captain and the first officer showed no signs of psychological distress, money problems, or extremist beliefs. Their families have always insisted they were innocent, and Malaysian authorities officially downplayed the importance of the simulator data. Another major theory considered by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau was a mass hypoxia event, meaning everyone on board was knocked out by a lack of oxygen due to a fire or technical problem. In that scenario, the plane would have continued on as a ghost flight on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. This would explain the long, silent flight south. The problem is, it doesn't really explain the deliberate turnback and the systematic shutdown of communication systems, which strongly suggest someone was in control. So, what about a hijacking? This was an early theory, especially after it was discovered that 2 Iranian passengers were on board using stolen passports, but they were quickly ruled out as having any connection to terror groups. Most importantly, no group has ever taken credit for the plane's disappearance, and there's no evidence anyone took over the aircraft. Some have even suggested a stowaway might have taken control, but that's pure speculation. Of course, this information vacuum was quickly filled by a flood of conspiracy theories online. Some claimed the plane was secretly flown to the US military base on Diego Garcia. Others suggested it was shot down during a military exercise, or that it was the victim of a remote cyber hijacking. None of these theories have any credible evidence and have been widely debunked by investigators and aviation experts. Each of these theories has supporters and flaws, and a decade later, not a single one has been proven. The debate continues to rage on in online forums, in documentaries, and among investigators. What do you think is the most plausible explanation for what happened to MH370? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. The disappearance of MH370 wasn't just an aviation mystery, it was a global media event like we'd never seen before. For months, it completely dominated the 24-hour news cycle, with every tiny development or rumour broadcast live to the world. This intense media pressure put a huge strain on Malaysian authorities, who were widely criticised for a lack of transparency and for releasing conflicting information in the early days. The frustration was especially high in China, where 2/3 of the passengers were from, leading to public protests and angry scenes at press briefings. The MH370 story also changed how we consume news in a crisis. Social media became a primary source of information for millions, but it also became a breeding ground for misinformation and wild theories. One study showed that 80% of Malaysians got their updates from social media, which highlights the challenge of controlling a story in our modern connected world. But behind the satellite pings, the search grids, and the competing theories, there's the most tragic part of this story: the human cost. For the families of the 239 people on board, the last decade has been an agonising wait in limbo. They've been caught in a state of suspended grief, unable to properly mourn, without any real answers. They've had to endure not just the loss of their loved ones, but also the circus of media speculation and the pain of false hope with every new search. As Jaquita Gonzalez, whose husband was a flight supervisor on board, put it, "We just want to know where it is and what happened." Memories come back like yesterday, it's fresh in our heads. Their quiet dignity and relentless search for the truth stand in stark contrast to the noise that has so often surrounded this mystery. The disappearance of MH370 sent shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. In its wake, new safety regulations were put in place. The International Civil Aviation Organization now requires new aircraft to have systems that can report their position every minute if they're in distress, making it much harder for a plane to just vanish. The incident also pushed forward advancements in deep-sea exploration technology, even though the main wreckage is still out there. The mystery of MH370 is not a cold case. In fact, hope for finding answers has recently been renewed. The American marine robotics company Ocean Infinity, which ran a private search back in 2018, launched a new search in early 2025. The company is working on a no-find, no-fee deal, using a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles to once again scan a vast stretch of the southern Indian Ocean. They are focusing on new, high-probability areas identified through advanced data analysis. The Malaysian government has agreed to pay up to $70 million if the wreckage is found and confirmed. For the families, this new search might be the last best chance to finally get the closure they've been waiting for over a decade. As of October 2025, the outcome of this renewed search is not yet known. More than 10 years after its final cryptic "Good night," Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 remains one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time. It's a story about the limits of our technology when faced with the raw power of the natural world. It's a story about the speed and chaos of information in our hyper-connected world. But more than anything, it's the story of 239 lost souls and the families they left behind, who are still waiting for an answer to one single, heartbreaking question: what happened? The search for MH370 has tested the limits of science, the endurance of hope, and what we choose to believe when faced with the unknown. While pieces of the plane have washed ashore, the main wreckage and the secrets it holds remain hidden in the crushing depths of the Indian Ocean. Whether this latest search will finally bring the truth to the surface is something no one knows. For now, the world can only watch, wait, and remember the flight that vanished into the night.